We believe that every developer can be an AI developer with the right tools and training. That's why we've launched GitHub Models on the GitHub Marketplace, a place for you to explore and experiment with a hand-picked collection of top models with entitlements attached to your GitHub account. So let's try out one of the newest models, GPT-4o. We can pass in an initial user prompt to interact with the model, and we can use the playground to adjust the parameters. For example, we can change the system prompt and experiment with the temperature for more or less randomness. Now that we've adjusted the parameters, we can send user prompts to interact with the model, simulating its use for our application. Now GPT-4o looks great, but I want to test how a different and smaller model handles this scenario. So let's switch to Phi3 Mini Instruct and evaluate its response. Looks good. Now we can also navigate to the details page to find out more information about the model through the README, evaluation, and transparency tabs. Now I've made my decision and I want to start using the models with code. By clicking the code button, we get access to some getting started instructions. We can even use a GitHub codespace to create a pre-configured development environment, ready with SDKs and some samples. Now the model API calls use the entitlements that come with my GitHub account. And because the codespace knows who I am, I don't have to add an API key or sign up to any other services to start experimenting in code. Talking about experimenting, let's update the streaming sample to use Phi3 Mini 4K Instruct. We'll also update the prompt and continue with our experiments. Now those entitlements we mentioned earlier follow you wherever you're logged in, including the GitHub CLI. Here, we're calling AI models to create questions for first-year computer science students so they can check their knowledge of Git. But we can even combine other CLI commands with the GitHub CLI. For example, let's summarize the last 10 commits of this repository using Phi3 Mini Instruct. GitHub Models helps minimize the friction as you explore and experiment with AI models. So take your first steps in building AI-powered apps by joining the waitlist for GitHub Models. We can't wait to see what you build next.
Hello. You seem to be on mute, at least it's...
I've been on mute all that time.
Yes, I did write to you to inform you. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Kadesha. Welcome to Open Source Fridays. So sorry I was on mute for like all that time I was speaking. I was saying that today we have Bjorn Butna joining us from Germany, and he's here to talk to us all about his amazing project that is all about API testing. Yes, I see somebody says that voice is inaudible. There's sound now, I'm hoping. I'm hoping you can hear me. Thank you for all the comments in the chat. What a great start. Yes, but it should be a good chat. It should be a good chat. But tell me, did I mispronounce your name? I'm sure I did. I was here practicing all along.
Yeah, slightly, but honestly, you're still in a very good percentage there.
And so how do you say it?
Björn Büttner.
Oh, Bjorn, not Bjorn. Bjorn. Bjorn
Yeah,
Butna.
again,
Bjorn
you're
Butna.
absolutely fine.
Bjorn
It's a
Butna. Okay,
difficult
cool.
name.
Yeah, but thanks so much for joining us. I know you're coming to us from Germany. I'm in Chicago, and it's about 78 degrees outside. What is it like in Germany right now?
I just looked it up. We have 77 degrees actually. My 80 that I guessed before was wrong. So yeah, at 7 p.m. it's pretty warm and sunny still.
Yeah, nice, nice. So let's get right into it, right? So tell us, who is Bjorn? Who's Bjorn Butner? What does he do? And how did you get into open source?
Oh, I've been a software engineer of sorts for 17 years, 14 years paid as a software engineer. And I got into open source because of a computer game originally where I reported bugs on with issues. That was my first step into open source.
Oh,
Later on,
wow.
I then got into other projects I was using, and well, API Bench was a project I started because I needed something along the lines and started building it around 4 years ago by now.
Nice. And do you work on API Bench full time now? What does that look like for you?
No, not at all. I do have a full-time job, but also web development, so it's related. We actually use API Bench for some tests at work even, but it is a private project doing in my free time. So weekends and evenings for the most part.
Nice. So tell us about API Bench. What made you want to build it? Like, what problem were you trying to solve? And how did you come up with the idea?
Yeah, the problem was a huge code base, around 3 to 4 million lines of code without
Hmm.
libraries, where any change could trigger performance increases that may have been minutes if you're unlucky. And we needed a way to easily measure and monitor that on a regular basis. And after trying out some other open source tools and adjusting them for our needs, we had the issue that there was no longer a documentation available that I could give anyone to make them able to proceed. It got
Mm.
too difficult. And API Bench technically is a rewrite of the open source libraries I used before. By the way, very good work. Also NPM packages. Um,
Interesting.
but they were no longer maintained to my knowledge. And instead of forking and completely ripping out the core and rewriting that, I started from scratch.
Wow.
TypeScript was important for better user support. So that you have type auto completion. Plug and play was important. So you had to write less code. Code generation came in with a CLI tool that we feature. So you can generate a lot of these test skeletons from scratch. Yeah, it has grown a bit over the years.
Yeah, I can see that. So, can you show us a demo? I guess let's just get right into the demo, and then I can ask you more questions later of what API Bench is, how it works, and how we can get started with it.
Yeah, of course. Um, it's your pick which one you want. I have two demos ready.
Okay?
Either it's two test APIs that are just fake APIs returning JSON data in this case, either JSON placeholder.typicode.com, which I'm using, or regress.in. Both technically work similar. We have a couple routes that are being tested. I'm
Okay.
just taking the first one
Yeah.
for now. Come on. The autoclip doesn't like me today.
That's okay.
So what I'm just doing now is run all the tests here. We can obviously in theory filter. I set them to 10 repetitions, which is pretty quick. So there is a total of 606 tasks being executed. And the Zoom messes up the default output, which I now notice. But we
That's
have a
okay.
better visual CSV, so you just need to zoom in a bit for that. So technically speaking, you have every single request, the amount of possible errors, how many requests were fired, standard deviation for both the central 80% as well as the total amount. You have an average, a median for both of those numbers, and yeah, minimum and maximum, of course, as well. So they give you statistics about your requests. With the standard deviation, allow you to figure out how stable are your requests. And with, yeah, usually you use the average and standard deviation to figure out, did anything break? Did anything change your times? So for example, we have about 6, wait a moment, we have a standard deviation of about 6 million right now on an average that seems to be around 123. So that is pretty good.
Okay.
Very little changes between the requests. So all 100 requests were very close to each other, which means the API is stable. This is a test API, so it's expected. But if you see that in real life, you know your API does handle the load in an expected manner and doesn't suddenly spike, for example.
Gotcha. So let's take a little step back for a minute. How do we get API Bench set up in our application?
Yeah, there's a CLI tool that is available that is at API minus at Idrinth minus API minus bench / CLI, which will allow you to just generate the base structure that we have here. I will just do that in the other folder. So Idrinth. So this one is, by the way, under being processed and is going to be easier. That installs the installs also tools. That should just take a couple seconds, and we'll create a new folder here for us, which already has all the baseline configuration files started. The same CLI can also generate the test or parts of the test code, which I can just go in and show. So for example, a GET request is as simple as this structure. You can extract the root URL as an environment variable, and that way you can have reusability. Post middleware or post is for processing and for checking. So in this case, it is checking if the status code is a 2xx, which is a very simple check. And all the structures are similar. The only important thing is the ID needs to be unique. Otherwise, you can't really group the results properly. So for example, if we look at a patch, I'm going to make that smaller while it's running. We can send a body. We can automatically convert it to JSON. Form also works, of course. XML is planned, but not implemented yet. And it will automatically send a patch request, do the same post-processing. Handling for things like JWT is in by default. It's also, for that I need the other example. It's done generating. So obviously cookies are in, and here we have a post-processing with, for example, the access token, which will take the access token from this publicly known login that is provided by the website, and provide it to other test cases that are being run afterwards. So for example, to this one. This one here has a maximum duration set. So this one would, for example, fail if it's above 100 nanoseconds. Not a useful number, but this is as a test for an example. You can set it to your maximum desired amount. You just need to add the post-processing for max duration, and you're done. We have around a dozen or so standard tests and processing tools provided. user agent as well, so you can filter your server logs for whatever the tool did. And yeah, that's pretty much the usual length of a test.
Yeah.
You can, so that is pretty simple. So since the process is over, we can now have a look at the benchmark folder. That is the default name that you could change. It did generate editor config ESLint, so the standard. It did install the package itself, so we have a couple of packages included. The usual Node.js problem with a node modules root bigger than the universe. TypeScript is supported by default, and it pre-generates a package JSON with with a start script that will just compile the TypeScript and run a benchmark with default sets, so you can get started right away. Source folder is by default empty, with the exception of the base structure. So if we want to add something in here, we could just create a new JavaScript or TypeScript file with the structure, and that's pretty much all the magic that you need. There's just one thing I'm going to do here. I don't want to have them angry at me sending 1,000 requests or something like that. So I'm going to limit the repetitions to 10 for now.
Okay.
All of that is obviously described on the website. So, and you do have information about it if you run it without the first argument. So you get a complete list of possible options. So let's create a tiny new file. I'm just going with JavaScript. For now, we need a function. The way the function is made, it doesn't really matter. So you can write the function keyword, you don't have to. We, by default, would auto-inject environment variables here if we do by name and convert them to a type. So that is what we did with the API URLs in the previous test. Yeah, let's just take one out of here, which will likely fail because I'm not logged in at that point.
Mm-hmm.
I think my ID just froze. That is not intentional. But yeah, I'm just stealing that one. So if we do that, the whole thing will freeze because it doesn't get an API URL. So I'm going to remove that for now and just steal the one of the .env file. So we are good to go here.
Okay.
So let's make that post and just see what we get back. So
Let me put this.
So the method actually is really just a string, so we can easily switch around. Something is off about my IDE right now. Presentation issues, I guess. So npm start is the default. It will run. So tsconfig source. Oh, wait a moment. We found a bug. That is, there's no TS files. So let's just convert it into a TS file. I'm terribly sorry about that. That should work right away then. Yep, exactly. And we have some kind. Oh. I see what the problem is. Export default, because it is defined as a module. Someone seems to have modified that without me remembering that. I'm terribly sorry. So let's.
Oh, you're fine.
It's just this
Okay.
should. Yeah, there we go. So
There we go.
100 requests is shown at this time regress.in, and we have pretty much the same output. No errors. 100 requests. They are also luckily formatted here, so you can actually have dots in there. Dots is Germany's way of commas for English-speaking countries. So you need to just exchange dot and comma. It's otherwise the same. It's a bit confusing. It takes your system defaults for formatting that. What we
Yeah.
do see here is the maximum and the minimum are very different by about 10 times. So we have a pretty high standard deviation as well.
So I have a question.
Yeah,
Can you
go
tell
ahead.
us what's the importance of knowing the standard deviation, the medium, the minimum, the max? Like, what are those columns? Like, what do those categories mean?
That is different measurements. That is is about the
Mm-hmm.
requests being fired. So we do store the individual requests for a while until we have the whole batch processed. And then we calculate statistics. Average and median is pretty clear. That is trying to figure out where is the middle ground of those requests. Average by taking the sum and dividing it through the amount. Median by taking just the middle one out of the whole thing. Max, min show the extremes. So how long would a user with that many parallel requests, in that case 10, potentially have to wait? So in this case, it's
Gotcha.
735 milliseconds. Yeah, the standard deviation shows how stable that is. In this case, it's not very stable, so the API is likely going to be slow on the first call and faster afterwards. That's a business
Gotcha.
decision then if you need to do something about that, or if you have stable enough calls to not care about startup time in that case. Because this API specifically seems to have a startup time that would explain the standard deviation being relatively small for the huge difference between min and max.
Right.
And you see
That's
with
what
the
I was trying to get at.
80%, yeah, and you see with the 80% as well that the difference is not so big when you cut off the extremes.
Mm-hmm.
That is interesting for less stable APIs, like
Mm-hmm.
APIs with the startup time.
Nice. So in
Yeah.
addition to measuring, the standard deviation, like the statistics, are there any other core features of API Bench?
Yeah, we can run load tests as well, for example, with the same tests. It's just a different argument. I'm not going to do that on that API here because I don't want to
Of course.
increase the cost. So please don't run load tests on APIs you don't own, because that can be very expensive, especially if hosted on some kind of cloud where you pay for the traffic. But yeah, other than that, we have integration tests named content tests as an option that run where you can just add way more post processing and also custom processing that is just integrated by special character defining where it's from
Mm-hmm.
and name. So you would add a middleware folder here and add a custom middleware, for example, to
Nice.
check its status, exactly status code 202. It just loads it by name and you're done. Works exactly like the one middlewares we have, by the way. We just have the Axon here reserved for that. Go back to the framework, and we do have a config file that allows you to blacklist any middleware you want for specific test types. So you don't need to create different tests for between benchmarking, load testing, and content or integration testing. You can use the same test definition. You just blacklist a couple of post-processing or pre-processing tools to reduce the effort you need and increase the amount of threads or workers your computer or your server can handle.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Stress
And
testing is planned, by the way. That is the third in the performance testing bunch. It's just not yet implemented. Expectation is sometime later this year.
nice. And can API Bench be used with any API that's built with any language, or is it specific to Node?
It can be used on any API with any language as long as it is reasonably REST-like.
Okay.
So JSON APIs and APIs using the form URL and code, like form submissions from HTML, are the default supported ones. XML is planned but not yet implemented. To have proper support right now, you would need to put in the XML string as a body.
Yeah. Cool. And it looks like we have some folks just joining, and there's a lot of questions about what we're talking about. So if you were in an elevator with somebody and they're just like, what is API Bench? What is the quick way you would explain this to someone?
So it's a one-stop solution to performance test your API.
Exactly. So API Bench is an open source project that you use to performance test your API. And the tool or the framework provides a lot of information about how your API performs and like how you can change it, what you can expect. It gives you some statistics. You can do load testing, which is not recommended from Bjorn. He said, do
It's
not do load
not on
testing
public
because it's
APIs
expensive.
that you don't own. Yeah,
Yes.
that is the main issue because you can easily on a notebook get over 100 threads,
Yes.
and that can create quite a bit of load.
Okay.
One nice side effect, by the way, is that we also support a couple of databases, so you can store your run data for later review and compare it.
Nice.
The website version and for that is in the works, likely also a bit later this year, ready. So you would have a default inclusion, but we also plan
Yeah.
to support a couple other tools to monitor API runtimes and performances.
Nice. And how much JavaScript is required or needed to use API Bench?
Um, Very little. You see the single user request, which is pretty much a JSON object. That is all the JavaScript you technically need, as long
Nice,
as you don't have custom middlewares. That is, a custom middleware can be a bit more complicated.
of course. And how does API Bench handle like large volumes of API requests? Does it even handle that?
Um, Depends on how large we are talking about. Right now, it does create an array of requests to be done, which has a technical limitation.
Mm-hmm.
But other than running out of memory because of the amount of API recalls done, there is to the amount there's very little limitations. Technically, you can also just use multiple machines to run those requests.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's no merging yet. It's planned, but we didn't decide yet how to handle it.
That's fine. Are there any alerts or notifications available that we could implement, or is API Bench able to be integrated in any CI/CD pipelines?
Yeah, it can. We have prepared Docker containers for
Oh, nice.
most pipelines, I believe. We have GitLab. We have one that works on GitHub. We have one for Gitea, and the one that works for GitHub should work anywhere pretty much. On top of that, we have a Jira integration that you can enable by environment variables that would allow you to post the results to your Jira as test results. Um, and yeah, it's planned to increase that to other instances. GitHub being one of
Nice.
them, by the way.
Of course.
No, you
Of
have a good
course.
API that makes it very nice to integrate. The specific case of Jira was something that was asked for by my employer, so it
Hmm.
was prioritized a bit higher.
Nice. Oh, your employer. So your employer allows you to work on API Bench during work hours?
Uh, Small amounts, yes. Jungville does allow me to spend some time on it, but it's not intentionally to be a main part, and obviously it's not the highest priority. But
Mm-hmm.
if we find something we need and I can quickly implement that, that is fine by my boss.
Nice. That's pretty cool. Sometimes I know that open source maintainers, like everything has to be separate. So it's nice to know there's even a little bit of overlap with your like 9 to 5 and like your side project. So what are the advantages? Someone is asking, can you please let me know the advantages of using API Bench?
Yeah, I think the main advantage is the small amount of code you need to write to get a good test coverage. The follow up, having different tests that can be executed from the same test code with no changes necessary. And last but not least, it's very easy to integrate in a CI pipeline, better
Mm-hmm.
than some other tools, in my opinion. And easier because it's built for a command line interface instead of a user interface, a UX.
Nice.
Yeah.
And I just saw a question about, please tell me how to use it, like the steps. We did go over the steps earlier. I'm going to pop the quick start guide on how to get started with API Bench in the chat. And you can go ahead and go to that link. I'm going to pop it up on the screen to get started with it. Or you can go to the repository. The repository has really good documentation on how you can get started with using it and integrating it into your application. So I see Ravi has a question. He says, can data for API Bench tests either be imported or synthesized?
Um, you can import specific requests from, for example, curl, open API documentation, HAR files. I think I'm missing something, one of them, but that is where you can get them. But technically, it's not intended that the requests differ. But you could create a custom request here. For example, add a mass random, for example, after the user ID, and every request would be different in that regard.
Mm,
Um, it's not intended because it is hard to compare measurements in that case, because you can't replicate the exact same requests anymore.
right.
So depends on your use case. If you're mostly using it for integration testing, mass random or similar things may be a good way. You could also use a middleware to randomly change a specific value. But for pure performance testing, usually you don't want too much randomness because otherwise you can't compare it very well.
Right. Nice. This is a really cool project. I built APIs, but I use Python to do the APIs. But since you say, I can possibly use it with Python, I'm gonna give it a go and
Yeah,
see the performance of those APIs.
very nice. Let me know how it goes. There should be no problem at all with the language. I'm mostly using PHP APIs and they work fine. I've tested it on Java, Spring Boot in that case, and that worked without issues. Because in the end, it does not attach to the process in any way, shape, or
Right.
form. It just measures the output.
The API, yeah. It's kind of like using any of those other API platforms, right? Like Insomnia or Bruno,
Yeah,
but it's specifically just testing the performance of
exactly.
your API in addition to like going to the route.
Exactly. It and it can. It's a bit easier to automate it than Insomnia
Yeah,
or Postman, for example, in my opinion, because it is made for automation. That is a primary citizen, so to speak, of the
and it's also
field.
right there with your code, right? So you can customize it per repository or per project.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like that a lot. So, what's on the horizon for API Bench? What are some upcoming features or issues that you're trying to solve?
Upcoming features is mostly more monitoring. So we are going to have a history website that you can self-host that will be
Ooh,
attached to your own database of API runs, so you can see graphs over how they perform, dig it down into the specific runs, or get a high-level overview. The problems we are working on are mostly related to the old core. So we are improving and refactoring that. For example, getting rid of the array that has a limitation, and especially to size. We're going to put in a generator instead, which will reduce that issue a lot by reducing the total memory size. And yeah, but further improvements include a desktop client that's built with Electron that is in the works. So you need even less coding to run it, less command line if you want that. Yeah, we're also working on more translations. Right now, there are 4 languages supported, some partially, some fully. And yeah, it's actually pretty easy to contribute translations because it's just YAML files that gets then passed into TypeScript and provide auto-completion for the programmer who tries to use translations.
I love that. Translation is such a great and low effort way to contribute to open source because so many projects need to be translated. And if that's your language, like that's something that you can just do without worrying about, oh my gosh, I'm gonna break the code base. So if you're interested in contributing to API Bench, make sure you go check out their issues and see where you can fit in. If translation is a thing that you're interested in doing in a different language, be sure to check out their needs and get going with the contributions.
Any language is technically welcome. I'm happy about anyone we can support, and if you need help, I'm usually on Slack, even if I'm this week less available. But yeah, sometimes you need some time off.
Of course, please take time off. I see a question here again. So if we need to pass authentication tokens when we make an API request, how do we do that with API Bench?
Yeah, we actually have an example here that is the access token in that case. That is using a middleware to automatically inject that token, in a bearer token in this case, to the headers. It is taken from a before route where you log in. I'm just going to scroll down to the post-processing using the same middleware, and will then be used by this middleware to provide it to other requests. We have the same for cookies, by the way, so that is part of the core handling. And I think we have 5 or 6 different different JSON structures we support for the access token alone by default. But otherwise, you just copy the middleware or add a pull request to add your structure to the middleware, and you're good to go. You just need to change this character to make it point to your library or your specific tool.
So let's say we have a tool called Peanuts. How would we change that to call Peanuts? Nice.
That is pretty much it. That will be expanded to middle. So Peanuts root folder source middleware's access token then automatically. So it enforces that schema. And yeah, that's pretty much all you need to get a middleware in. Peanuts would be the package name in that case. If you have it in the root of your project, we are talking about a hash instead. So this would automatically go to source middleware's access token in this case. So it would be next to the routes here. Those shortcuts just save time. You can also put an absolute path in if you want to, but that's not recommended.
Nice. I love how straightforward that is actually. Sometimes with tools like this type of performance testing stuff, it can be so difficult to customize or to update or to do any sort of something with the tool to make it yours. I love how straightforward that was to just like add a middleware called Peanuts to, access that token. That was very good.
Yeah, that was one of the main issues because I had to monitor very different APIs. So where I needed very many different middlewares to deal with very many different things.
Nice. So, like, tell me about the developer experience, right? So, when you were building API Bench, was developer experience like front of mind for you when you were working on
Yes,
this?
that is why we have TypeScript pretty much, because that allows you auto-completion. So
Yeah.
let me just scroll up here. We do actually have a type for those tests. It's called task. Let me see if it auto-completes. Doesn't like me today, I guess. And you could just add that as a return type and I see something doesn't match up right now, but it can. Interesting. It needs to be partial. Sorry, my bad. The task is the entries that should work with that, actually. I'm not sure why it doesn't like the partial. But yeah, technically you have the task type. I'm not sure why it doesn't work right now. Will double check right afterwards what TypeScript doesn't like.
I
But
know
yeah,
TypeScript is very particular.
I think it might just be a return type here that doesn't work anymore. We released the last version just, I think, half a month ago. So there are still a couple smaller issues from time to time,
Hmm.
because we do need more tests, which sadly we are in the upper 70% range only right now,
Cool.
which I'm not happy about. We once were in the 90% range. It just dropped a bit recently by adding a lot of libraries and support for databases mostly. So database support has MySQL, MariaDB, Postgres, MS SQL, for example, in there, all done by environment variables. But yeah, technically you have the task, everything is exported. You can also call it programmatically if you need more control. It exposes the main function with all possible types you can hand in. You can change the reporters. You can modify the numbers in the reports. For
Hmm.
example, if you want seconds instead of nanoseconds, you can
Hmm.
just add a modifier to the reporters that will do that for you. There are some default ones, like those conversions.
Nice. That's awesome. I like this project a lot.
Yeah,
It's very useful. It has a great use case. It's I don't like to use the word easy, but it's straightforward to implement with really good documentation. I really appreciate all the effort that you and the team
yeah.
have put into this project. Like, I can tell that a lot of thought has gone into ensuring that it's a solid product, but also that the dev experience is one that's like pretty seamless. Because sometimes as developers, we don't like to learn new tools, and if we have to pick something up, we want it to be a very seamless experience. This is definitely very seamless. So what would you like to tell everyone as we get ready to wrap up? Like, are you looking for contributors? Are you looking for additional maintainers? What would you like folks to do?
I'm really happy about anyone who wants to contribute, to learn, to share knowledge. We are very open about letting people do their first steps and support them as well. I don't think we need additional maintainers at the moment. Yeah, there is a documentation website, Vaibavjain. I hope I didn't mispronounce your name completely. But yeah, additional maintainers, not necessarily. We do have a core team of 10 people at the moment. We have around 50 total contributors, with a couple non-code contributors as well. And yeah, they are shouted out on the documentation website actually, which uses the GitHub API for the code contributors to get their contributions automatically, and a JSON file to add everyone who's non-code contributor, like, for example, the person who created the logo.
Nice. I love that. Group effort on the open source project. Well, thank you so much, Bjorn, for joining us today on Open
Thank
Source
you for
Friday.
having me.
This has been a pleasure. I really like API Bench, and I really think I'm about to like go start and dig into the docs and implement it in at least one of my APIs to see, what improvements can I make and how can I, make this more secure, more better, all that jazz. But thank you so much for coming on today. Thank you everyone for joining. It's been a pleasure having you. And we will see you next week on Open Source Friday. Bye.
Bye.